Hey YouTube, today we're sharing something very special, a Q&A session with our very own Phil Galfond. In this session, Phil touches on topics like mental game, goal setting, answers some of your poker questions, and even reviews a couple of hands with us. In this session, he helped introduce Race to 10, which is our new 6-month bespoke coaching program for low stakes live, no limit hold'em cash game players. And the goal of the program is to get you to a $10,000 bankroll within the next 6 months. If you're a low stakes live cash game player, we will help you with a structured curriculum, 2 live coaching calls every single week, and a supportive community around you to help you achieve your goals. So if that sounds something that you're interested in, check out race to10.com for more information. And without further ado, here's Phil Galfond. Can you tell us a bit about what your day-to-day life looks like nowadays, and how does that compare to when you were playing on a regular basis?
It's a lot different. So nowadays I've actually just been working on V4 of my schedule. I've gone through a few iterations of trying to optimize, I mean, the gist is I wake up around 6 and head straight to my office, and I'm here till 5, um, with some breaks to eat and exercise. And mostly I'm like, right now I mean, I don't know how granular you want to get. A couple of days a week are my call days. So I have Mondays and Thursdays, I'm on calls all day. And then I have Tuesdays and Fridays, I'm just moving things forward on my own, doing solo work. And I work a half day Wednesday and a half day Saturday, um, because I have a 5-year-old son, and I realized that I never spent any time alone with my wife without him there. And so I work the mornings on Wednesdays and then hang out with my wife, and then do some extra work on Saturday. So we have that opportunity. But yeah, when I was playing, at different stages, like with the Galfond challenges where I'd play scheduled matches against one opponent, they were scheduled. And I actually had a schedule. It wasn't quite similar to this because poker players didn't want to start at like 8 a.m., which I would have wanted to. But it was structured. And before that, when I was purely a poker player, my schedule was all over the place, and generally late. Would wake up at 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. and go to sleep between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Generally. And I actually had a stage in my life where I was on like a 26-hour schedule. So I would sleep 12 hours, I'd be awake 14 hours. And then it was 2 hours later every day. So I've been all over the place. But yeah, obviously, doing coaching, running a business, or businesses, and creating content, I'm now a lot more structured because, well, I can be and I have to be, since I'm a father.
Did you like the bursts of playing, or did you miss the whole, like, the gen, like, 10, 15-hour session days, like, back in the day? Would you have preferred to do your challenges like that if you had, no reasons not to?
Yeah, I would. I always liked the long sessions. It's weird to me today because I like work with people who, like today's generation, the people who came up post solver era. A lot of the pros will they'll play like 2.5 hours, and they'll take a break and they'll play another like 2 hour session, then they're done for the day because they want to always be like performing optimally. And when I mean, I would just play 12 hours straight. And I thought I was doing fine, but in hindsight, I could see that, hours 9, 10, 11, and 12 were not quite as strong as hours, 1 and 2. But yeah, I had fun with just kind of sitting down and playing as long as I wanted, and not having a forced endpoint. That said, I'm realizing now, first of all, having some structure, even just like being done at 5 p.m. and knowing that I am, has made me more efficient and productive during the hours I have, like much more. Um, because I used to consider myself very lazy. And I think that, I mean, there are a lot of things I've done to be less lazy, but one of them is just that having that constraint. It's like, okay, I don't have as long as I want to work, so I better do it now because I'm gonna have to stop. And then also sleep. I think sleep is like the key piece, like one of the most, maybe the most critical piece to high performance. especially in something like poker, but really in any aspect of life, but especially something where like you have to access high levels of thought immediately with a time bank. Um, Sleep is critical, and one of the key pieces to sleep is waking up at the same time every day. And so, I do. There are pros and cons. I'm happy generally with where I'm at now. Struggle big time being part time, and but I know a lot of people here have to if they want to play poker. So, step one is getting sign off from your family, like your especially a partner. One of the things that I have learned is it's very easy to have stories in our head of like you ask permission, like maybe every week you're like, hey, I'm gonna go play today if that's all right, and they say yes, and you have a story in your head that they're upset about it and they want you to play less. Or maybe you just do it and you kind of dictate when you're going to be available, but you have a story in your head about them being upset about it. There's tension created from that. But if you actually sit down and have a conversation, say, hey, um, this is important to me either as a hobby or I have some goals around poker and I want to get to here for us. And then getting on the same page and kind of getting that out of your head, because going into a session feeling like somebody's resenting you for being there and feeling like you have limited time because you're going to upset people while you're gone. And then feeling like when it's going badly that like, I put myself like, I'm upsetting my partner and I'm losing being here. Like, what's the point of this? Yeah, it's really easy to get thrown off mindset wise. So step one, I'd say, is have a plan that if there are other people who depend on you, have them on board for the plan. For me, I find like my highest performance is always earlier in the day. And especially if I haven't done a lot of strenuous mental work. So if I were playing part time, well, how do I put this? It really depends on your schedule and game availability. I would love to play in the mornings. And so if I work full time, 9 to 5 on the weekdays, I would play weekends and play weekend mornings. Realistically, the games are better at night. And so you might not have that option. If I had work, a job, and a family and was playing part time, then I would want to set however many, weeknights or weekend days aside. And that was just we all understood. If I had a job but not a family, then I would want to have the days in my mind, the times that I might play in my mind, but I would only go play if I felt like it. Because if you have that control over whether or not you play, going into a session not really feeling up to it is kind of a recipe for potential disaster. And as far as studying, I would usually do that last. So let's say that I had a Saturday and I had 8 hours that I was going to dedicate to poker. Like maybe that's just the one day a week that I dedicate to poker, Saturday. I might play 6 hours, study 2 hours, or play 7 hours, study 1 hour at the end. For me personally, I find that I want to use like, when you're studying, yes, it requires mental bandwidth, but you don't need to find the right answer in 60 seconds or whatever it is. You can take your time. You're not rushed. And so like that level of optimal performance is less important. I also, for me personally, I don't love studying a lot. And so I think forcing yourself to study if you really don't like it, um, like you're going to learn more playing if you love playing than studying all the time, like with a lot of your time, if you really hate it. But yeah, find ways to study that you like. This is I think, the biggest hack for any stage of poker that you're at, or really if you're kind of like, most lines of work, is surrounding yourself with other people who are passionate and who are doing it with you and learning together. Um, First of all, it makes studying more fun. Like there are ways to study with other people that you can't do on your own that makes it a lot easier. Um, and I found this even today when, I have more discipline than I used to, but even still, this just the other day, I was doing like a poker stat analysis, um, and I was helping a friend review some of his stats, and I had sat down to do it, and I was just like staring at my screen, and was struggling to do it because like I had a long day, and and I actually just like pulled up. I pulled up, I think Camtasia, whatever. It doesn't matter what I pulled up, but I just recorded myself doing it. So I recorded myself doing the stat analysis and talking through it as if I was having a conversation with him. And then I sent him both the video and the end result, which was a document. And I just found it a lot better. And if you can do that, now I did that because he wasn't available at the time I was doing it. I would have loved to have done it on a call, which is even easier. But I mean, we're pretty far on the tangent. So, finding a crew initially, crew was hugely beneficial. I mean, really at every stage of my career, like most of my growth has come from working with other people. I think the biggest key that I want to point out is that it doesn't have to be people better than you. It doesn't even have to be people on your level necessarily. I learned probably most of the studying I did was with two different individuals at different points in my career, both of which were, played at several stakes below me. Um, but we just made a good team. And, and so people who are dedicated and who ask good questions or will put in work with you, um, don't like, I've had students ask like, I want to find a crew, but, I want people who are like, I can learn from that are, beating games that I aspire to. And yes, that's great. If somebody's doing what you aspire to do, they're an excellent person to learn from. But also it's hard to find those people and have them essentially coach you for free. And so I don't be kind of a crew snob, and just surround yourself with people who are willing to work, because it's really powerful. So at the beginning, yeah, I found my crew on 2+2 forums, which when I came up 20 years ago were very like those forums were active and thriving, and we discussed like, I mean, by today's standards, it wasn't in-depth strategy, but by 20 years ago standards, it was in-depth strategy just on public forums. And you don't see that as much anymore. Um, but one of the many motivations for Raise to 10 was just that the community and having other people to work with is just so critical. And there aren't as many of these places as there used to be to find that.
Think part of poker is executing in game, and some people just struggle with that for whatever reason, but just are really good at the back end stuff. They just can't for some reason, like tilt gets in the way or other things. And
So I'll give you an example that you guys know. So my Run At Once co-founder Dan Quinn, he was one of the two people I mentioned. I studied with him about as much as anybody, and he was a good winning player. He was he was winning at 5-10 and 10-20, and sometimes I think the biggest he played successfully was 25-50. And this is when I was playing up to 300, 600, no limit. And when we would talk about hands off the table and discuss them, I felt like we were on par. Um, and like, yeah, he was super helpful and would catch some things that I wouldn't, and I would catch some things that he wouldn't. But I felt like in analyzing hands, we were very similar. And sometimes I would watch him play, and he would make a play, and I'd say, "Why would you do that?" And he'd be like, "Oh, I don't know, that was stupid." And so for some reason, some people aren't like, performance is an element of it that is kind of inexplicable in some cases. There are a lot of ways to improve your performance. But sometimes, yeah, it's kind of, for some reason, some people just like have it in that moment in a way that others don't.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting analogy here with, for example, the NBA, where a lot of like players struggle with their free throw shooting for some reason. Although in practice, let's say they're like 9 out of 10 shooters, but in game, like that's where the problems would actually lie.
Yeah. And I think to continue on with that analogy, some of it is psychological pressure, but also some of it is fatigue. Potentially, they're playing in a game and they're going all out throughout the game, and then they get to the line. And I mean, I'm no basketball player, but I would imagine, like your arms are weaker, your legs are weaker. Whereas in practice, even if you've been practicing and you've been practicing shooting, it's a different thing. And so, yeah, there's a combination of building up your mindset and kind of building up your endurance or taking care of your body and mind, going into a session.
Yeah, and the pressure of that moment too, like, you know, I mean, it's like you said, it's the end of the game and you're tired, and then you're like trying to make a free throw that actually has an effect on the outcome of the game. Whereas like early on, like you make that, you know, you're well rested and you make that free throw that really is pretty meaningless at this point. It's like obviously, like you said, like Dan like had maybe trouble at a certain point with the stakes. Maybe part of it also was just like respecting that money too much. Whereas, you know,
Yeah.
some people just are able to execute no matter they see it as numbers on the screen and you know, nothing else. I know you've talked about that in past interviews of how, like, at that time, like you were in college, like you had never had money before, like it was just kind of like there you weren't doing anything tangible with it that really made it feel like, you know, real money. So easier to separate.
Yeah, it was video game points, and that is a big advantage I think young players have. I mean, there are advantages older players have too, but an advantage the younger players have, especially if they have known like yeah, at the time my all my friends were, you know, with the exception of my poker friends, a few of them, like my friends were college kids that didn't have any money, and if I lost that $120,000 pot, and then I lost, you know, the next 6 of them, you know, they seem happy, I'd be fine. Um, so that is a big advantage for sure. I think that, one of the biggest things, whether it's in poker or any kind of decision making, and poker really drills this into your mind, but just like uh, the avoidance of being results oriented, um, all you can do is the best you can do. You can take in the information that you have and make the best decision you can in the time allotted. And once you recognize that, like, not only might you run into the part of an opponent's range that was the top of their range and you lose a huge pot, and you're like, well, on average, that was a good play. And this time it didn't happen, so I can't be results oriented. It was a good play. Not even that. Sometimes you can make the terrible play and actually make the mistake and still forgive yourself, just knowing that, like, you know, 8 times out of 10, I'm making the right decision in these spots. And sometimes I'm just like, you know, for whatever reason, my brain doesn't get there in time. And that's actually okay. You know, I have this come up a lot when I've like invested in other poker players, and they've gone and they like have played a tournament and they busted the tournament, and they came back and they were like, yeah, I just like, I'm sorry. I screwed this one up. Like I did this, and this happened. And you know, I don't know what happened, but I screwed up and I'm sorry. And I'd say, you know, don't be sorry. Cause what I'm investing in that person is, on average, I'm expecting that they can make better decisions than their opposition. And factored into that is that sometimes they won't. Some of the times so I'm investing in the good and the bad. And that's how I like to think of it with myself too. That, you know, as long as I'm trying and I'm doing what I can to prepare and I'm trying my best in the moment, I'm absolutely going to make mistakes. And that's just part of it. It's hard to answer because, you know, you kind of need both. I think mental game and soft skills, if you're talking about longevity and I have to pick, then yeah, I think those end up being more important. And especially because, you know, there are a fair number of poker games that are beatable without advanced technical skills. And so it's more about, you know, more people. I saw a quote just the other day that is by somebody else in like sports betting, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it was something like, you know, nobody's ever gone broke by like betting too small of a number, but people have gone broke betting too big of a number. And I think, yeah, that like the ways that you blow up and end, you know, a poker bankroll are poor, poor decisions and soft skill situations, letting your emotions get the better of you. And yeah, like technical skill is going to help you, but it's also, you have time to keep working on your technical skill. If your bankroll management, if your mindset, if all of that is good, and let's say you're maybe only a break-even player or a small loser, then yeah, over time you're going to start, like, you have time to right the ship. Whereas if you don't have the soft skills, if you don't have the mental game, if you don't have the tilt control, you might run out of time to correct that, like real fast. Two key things that I would look for. So basically, I would rely on people rather than tools at the beginning. I think that's really critical. In today's, in the modern era of poker, there are really powerful tools, study optimal solutions and things like that. And I think that they are of great use once you really know what you're doing, and they can be of great use even if you're not that skilled, but you're instructed the right way. They can also be really detrimental if you don't know how to use them well. And so the two things that I strongly recommend, one, I already said, which is people. So this could be a crew that you're studying with, it could be a mentor or a coach, but just people who are working with you. And the second is structured content. So, I run a once, we have a massive library of really valuable videos in our elite and essential plans, but they're not super structured. There's just like a ton of videos from great players doing great things. And I think for skilled players, it's super valuable. But for newer players, I think you need to start with, whether it's a book or a course or a program that takes you through the beginning steps. It's just going to fast track, shortcut your growth quite a bit. So it's, structure and people. It is challenging because when you're a relative beginner, a lot of what other people are saying, like, sounds good. Like, a lot of people sound smart, including people that might lead you astray. And it is really difficult to figure it out. And so I would lean on others, whether it's on, I don't know, like Reddit or so, like somewhere that people talk poker. I would see what others have learned from and what others value. And some of them are going to be wrong too. So there is some risk there, but that's kind of all the more reason I would try a couple of things out. And in my opinion, from almost everybody, and this is, they're a small group of people that this doesn't make financial sense for, but for almost everybody, I think you're going to save time and money by spending money up front. So buy a $50 course, $100 course, $150 course, and like buy a couple of them and compare them. And that way, if one of them is bad and one is good, you might be able to discern the difference. But even if all of them are good, you'll get an idea for what type of what teacher is resonating with you. Because I think we all, there are some people, we could all talk about who the best teachers are, and there's going to be some consensus. But the fact of the matter is, for every individual student, there's a different kind of thing that they need to hear, a different way of teaching that might get through to them. And so it might not be the one that everybody considers the best option, or most people consider the best option. It might be a different one that resonates with you. So, I would start there. A lot of people aren't going to listen to me because they don't want to invest money up front. I really would recommend it because, it doesn't matter where, but like the amount of hours that you're going to spend navigating free content and learning from it and like realizing what's good and what's not, and it being unstructured, the amount of time you're going to spend consuming a bunch of unstructured YouTube videos, which I make free YouTube videos, by the way. You can go learn from them for free. And you can learn from other YouTube videos too. It's not where I'd recommend people start, truly. But you can do that. So you can get a feel for people on YouTube, or I would say YouTube, like there are people who make shorts on, whether it's TikTok or YouTube shorts or Instagram Reels. But like, you can't really get into strategy in 60 seconds or 90 seconds. So I would say if you're not going to take my advice and buy a couple courses, YouTube is the place that's the best place to make that mistake. There are a few different purposes that goals serve. One is motivation. And for some people don't need motivation. Like there are some people out there that say, I'm going to start running. And then they just start running and they do it. Other people say, I need to start running. And then 6 months later, they say, I need to start running. And then 6 years later, they say, I need to start running. I did that one time for like a week, but now I really need to. So for people like that, I think goals can help, and like a structure around goals can help them get motivated to take action. But goals can also just give you clarity. Like if you know, um, if you know where you're trying to get to, rather than just like, I'm going to play some poker and have some fun, or I'm going to play poker and try to get better. If you have a goal in mind, it can sometimes elucidate the path towards that goal as you're just actually thinking about it in concrete terms. So yeah, I think goal setting is good. The reason I'm kind of hesitating is that, some people are going to be watching this. If there are some like very casual players that are just like, I don't really know what I want with poker. I just want to like play and I want to get a little better, but I don't really know what I want until I experience it and see how, like, what's possible. And that's okay. That's okay too. My natural ability was well above average to stay calm. I'm just like a very calm person naturally. But I think no matter how calm you are, um, poker is, I mean, really, well, first of all, losing sucks, and losing money sucks more. And there are a lot of things in poker that will get you very upset. Moreover, poker, obviously, I made a living playing poker. A lot of people have made a good living playing poker. At the end of the day, it is gambling, and gambling is designed to mess with your mind. So I think no matter how calm you are, um, it's still just like it's designed to trick us. And I think like every mental game coach that I've worked with, I've found well worth it, because I've just improved myself more in that area. And I think I don't know anybody who's, reached enlightenment to the point where they're not impacted by things. And I think when you like, if you go to the casino and you play with people, I'm sure you have some like, well, maybe not, depending on the stakes you're playing, but I'm sure there are some people that you're like, that person doesn't tilt. Like they seem fine. I assure you that they tilt. It's just it doesn't look the way that you think tilt looks, or it doesn't look the way that tilt looks for you or for somebody else at the table. But they get thrown off, they get emotionally impacted, and they play differently. It might not be by spewing a bunch of money in, it might actually be by becoming a massive nit and being afraid to put money in until they have the nuts. It might be by getting really passive. There are lots of ways that the emotions of the game and fear and stress and disappointment and anger can make you play differently. It just doesn't always look the same. I kind of view it as like there's mindset work and there are mindset hacks. And so the shortcuts are the hacks. And so um, this would be things like, right now, away from the table in a calm state, you can trust yourself to make good decisions. Whereas at the table, when things are going poorly, you can't necessarily trust yourself to make optimal decisions. So what decisions can you make now so that future you, tilted you, doesn't have to make them? And this could be things like having a stop loss. It could be things like I take a break every hour. It could be, every time I lose a buy-in, I finish the orbit and then I go take a walk for 15 minutes and I evaluate, like I have a checklist of things that I ask myself, like, is this game good? Am I feeling okay? Like you can have all these, like basically set up guardrails for yourself. And this is similar to if you are, if you're trying to improve your diet, well, you don't have ice cream in the house. It's like one of the guardrails you can set up. They're just things that, you know, the the craving could still be there and you still might go around it. You might go drive to an ice cream shop or you might order ice cream. But just adding that friction um, makes you more likely to succeed. The same is true in poker. Like, yeah, you could go take your hour could come up and you're supposed to take that break and you just don't do it. Like that's possible. Or you go on the break and you look at that thing and you're like, well, I'm not fine right now. I'm pretty upset, but I'm just going to play anyway. That might happen, but it's giving you more chances for success. So I would do that. I also like every time the action's on you, you have an opportunity to make the best play possible or the perfect play, however you want to think of it. And if you think about that as the goal, is like, okay, each thinking of each individual decision point, not every individual hand, but every individual decision point has its own kind of like new game. It's like, okay, it's on me. I have a chance now to make a great decision. And what that can do for you is, obviously, it's ideal that you're always in the moment. You're not thinking about the past or afraid about the future. But it can also remove some of the things that just like clog up your brain. Like, for example, hoping for a good river, or like hoping to avoid a bad river. Because sometimes, like when I'll have this mindset and I'm focusing on it, I'm not even afraid of a river because I know, well, if I think my opponent almost definitely has a draw, and if they don't have a draw, they have a second pair, then they're not going to turn into a bluff. Well, now I know on a heart, I'm just going to check fold, and it's really easy. I'm going to make the perfect decision. And it removes some of the fear and kind of focusing on results that can lead to more tilt. One thing I want to add is like, and here's one of the great things about goals, and this is kind of, I mean, you call it a hack, but it's really just like, I think approaching life in a better way is, if you look forward to, and this is for more, well, if you have some clarity around what poker is to you, but if you can look forward to 5 years from now and say, this is where I want to be in 5 years. And then you picture that graph. Like, what does it look like from where you are to where you want to be in 5 years? And it's going to be a graph like this, right? There's going to be some swings and then like that and so on and so forth. Then when you have a bad session, like zoom in on that graph, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. Like, first of all, it's a tiny blip on this massive, like, it means nothing in this 5 year scheme of things. It means absolutely nothing. And it was entirely expected. Like, it's what's supposed to happen. It's part of this graph. So you're not off course. You're like, everything's not ruined. You're just living through exactly what you're supposed to be living through. And it's really that zooming out, and putting things into perspective of, yeah, I lost 7 buy-ins this session. So what? Like, that's exactly, like, this was 100% going to happen. I was going to lose 7 buy-ins multiple times during the next 5 years. So what's the big deal? It might be that. There is another that comes to mind that might have been more challenging. It was fewer buy-ins, but more dollars. But the challenge was it was spread over. So this is a period of my career. It would have been like 2018 or something, 2018, 2019 maybe, or 2017, 28, whatever. I was working full time, essentially. And so like I wasn't playing that much, but there was a game that I played in. It was a live game. It would come to town for like 4 or 5 days in a row, like once a month. And sometimes 3 to 4 days in a row. Anyway, I had done well in it for a year. And then, yeah, for like over a year, it was maybe a year and a half, I had a downswing. And it was a big game. It was 100K buy-in cash game. And again, it wasn't nearly as many buy-ins as the Venny VD match, but stakes were higher. And it was just so tough because the reason it was so emotionally tough is there's just like, I play and then there's 3.5 weeks off, 4 weeks off. And like, okay, now I have a chance to make some of that back. And then I lose again. And okay, a month off or 2 months off. And then I have like the pressure of each session felt so important. Whereas like in the Venny challenge, obviously that was brutal, but every individual loss wasn't like, I wasn't going into every session being like, this, I have to like win today. Cause I knew that more hands were coming and more hands were coming again and again. So this live poker and like stretched out over a long period of time, was more emotionally taxing, I think.
Yeah, that's like super relevant because like if you're somebody who plays like mainly live games, it's easy to forget, especially if you feel like you're a pretty big winner in the games. Even if you're a pretty big winner, you're getting so few hands per hour that these things can really stretch on. Even if the worst case scenario isn't too bad, going through a few months of playing a decent amount of hours and breaking even, it messes with your mind a little bit just as a human being. So,
Yep. And I think the one positive thing, about live poker, and like, this is a challenge of the game I was playing because it was a pretty tough game. But playing live poker at lower stakes with pretty good skill, um, you can have pretty high win rate and relatively low standard deviation compared to like heads up online, certainly. And so you can, I guess what I want to get to is, because of how challenging this can be, especially if you're playing, somewhat part-time, I think for a lot of people, if you're making a decision, let's say between playing 1-2 and 2-5, and you think like your hourly is maybe 30% better at 2-5, it's often going to be better to play 1-2, because the downswings are going to be far more infrequent. They're going to be for less money. And um, like when you think about it in theory, okay, I'm going to make 30% more money playing 2-5 because I'm going to have however the math works out, right? I have less than half the win rate, or like a third of the win rate, but the stakes are bigger, or whatever, half the win rate. It doesn't matter. Math. But what happens in reality is you have much more frequent downswings. The downswings are larger in dollar value, as well as number of buy-ins. And then you play worse, or you take time off, and then it gets extended more and more. And so sometimes the theoretical lower EV option that comes with not just half the swings, not just like, a third of the swings, but like 10, 1/6 of the swings, or less, just ends up being the higher EV option, specifically because of the lack of swings. And I shouldn't say lack of swings. Swings still happen, but just like not to the same level.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I feel like that's something not too many people talk about in poker. Just like even just at that exact example, like with the 2-5 versus 1-2 thing, like, yeah, like you might have like a 10% higher hourly or something in a certain situation, like even like regularly, but just like, can you execute and will you maintain that versus if you just play that lower game that consistently goes like, and say that higher game doesn't even go all the time too, then like there's an extra factor of like, okay, I play this bigger game and I do have a higher hourly, but like, am I gonna like, what's going to be my path to recouping that if this game doesn't run again? And I'm sure that's been something that's been relevant to you. Like, like
Yeah.
this games disappear at the highest stakes all the time. Whereas at least, for our audience here, like at least if you're playing 1-2 and 2-5, you're probably always going to have a game available, which is, should be comforting for getting through the variants. So
Yeah, absolutely. I've a student that is dealing with this because his games are 5-10 or 100-200, and he's been losing in the 100-200 game, and it's just like, yeah, it adds so much stress, and you are worried it's going to go away, and yeah, there's just like it's sometimes, even if the money is double or triple, it's sometimes not worth it. And further, in the example of 1-2 versus 2-5, um, yeah, like everything we both just said is true. And what if you're wrong about your edge? Like, what if you're a little bit worse than you think? Or what if you're on your C game? Like now in the 1-2 game, maybe you win half as much per hour, but in a 2-5 game, you actually flip to a losing player. And then like the graph looks much, much different.
Thorsten says, doesn't your free ebook start with, if you think you're on a downswing? Congrats, you are not.
You're not on a downswing unless you intend to keep losing. So you lost in the past. And I do think that like it's a reframe, but it's just true, right? You've lost in the past. There's no correlation of like luck to luck in the past versus luck today going forward. Now there are some correlations with, you've been unlucky and now you're tilted and now you're making poor decisions, and then it might continue. But as long as you can separate from that, and you have, good habits and good soft skills and so on and so forth, I think it's helpful to remind yourself that like, no, I'm not supposed to lose. It's going for like, I'm starting fresh every session. So I've gone through different stages of this. Where I'm at now is no, but it is. So there have been times in my career where was sad that I moved away from Nolan Hold'em, because like the Nolan Hold'em games came back and they became big, and like now I'm just a PLO player. Um, that said, tournaments, I just don't like tournaments. So even if I got like, I've had times in, years past where I'm like, okay, well, the only open games are going to be like, the only open nosebleed games that are going to continue are going to be tournaments. So, and like, I know a lot of great tournament players. I could get into like a study group, and like I could get really good at tournaments, I think. And I've considered that somewhat seriously. And every time I go down that path, I'm just like, but I don't like it. Like, I don't like playing tournaments, and I'm not going to like it just because I get good at them. So is there a FOMO in some way? Yeah, but it's kind of like I just know it's never like, it's just not me. Like, you know, t- uh, I'd also love to be in the NBA, but I'm 5'6", so like, I don't think about it. Um, the the other thing though is like, I I think with adapting and making yourself, a multi-game player, and or kind of diversifying income streams, things like that. I think there are pros and cons, and I think that specifically with like, what I've come to believe more lately is that it's best to be very intentional about those decisions. And what I mean by that is, if you can see the tide shifting, and you're a no limit cash game player, and you can see the tide shifting where, okay, it looks like I've really thought about this. It looks like these games are drying up a little bit. I can see the rise of these other opportunities, and I can see, maybe I'd consider moving to this state where like PLO is huge. And um, if you make a very intentional decision that way, then great. Um, but just learning another game to have the option, I think, has become like, I don't like that as much, just because I think you're like splitting your focus. So that the way this kind of concept was introduced to me was intentional congruence, which is the idea that, like the things that you're spending your time and energy and effort on are additive to each other. So for example, this would be, um, being a no limit cash game player and being a no limit cash game coach. Both of those are additive to each other. Or maybe, creating, if you wanted to create content, then creating no limit cash game content, but also, maybe outsource some of the skills that have nothing to do with that, if possible, so that like, when you're spending time on the different avenues that you're spending time on, they're additive to each other, rather than just like, if I'm spending time on no limit cash and I'm, learning how to build a business, those are like, this could be the right path, but they're learning how to build a business is not helping my no limit cash game at all. And getting better at no limit cash from the point I'm at is not helping me to grow a business at all. And so I'm kind of like, we can't be world class at everything, and we can't be our best at everything, if we focus on everything at the same time. And I think it is really helpful to be kind of intentionally focused on one thing to get really good there and make the most of that opportunity. Again, with the caveat that, if you want to, let's say that you are a no limit cash game pro and that's how you're making your money, and you would like to eventually run a business, well then, yeah, at some point you're going to have to like split some focus, and that's just how it's going to be. But um, I would say, yeah, it's nice to be able to look, if a new game pops up and you happen to know how to play it, that's a great way to cash in on that opportunity. But also, what did it cost you to get prepared for that? And how often does that opportunity show up? I do think there's risk to splitting focus as well. I think there's more to achieve, but I don't think there's like, I mean, it's weird picking words, but there's just the way it feels to me. So there's more to achieve, but there's not like more growth. There's not more to grow. Um, and the I think that's okay to just achieve and not grow. And I love playing poker. I still haven't found anything that, like hour per hour, I enjoy more than playing poker as a profession. And so right now, like like I was saying, I'm not going to dedicate myself to tournaments to do something I don't like, because I'm good doing other things. But if things changed and, high stakes online cash games were, being spread across the US and I could play them in Nevada, then I very likely would switch my focus and focus on that. Uh, so yeah, to answer your question, I don't like, I think that I've proven to myself that I can do it. And actually the Galfond challenges were a big part of that. Um, because before that I had not proven to myself that I could compete in the post solver era of poker and compete. It's one thing to have succeeded in, the early, like the heyday of online poker, but to challenge myself. So like that was a big thing that I think I would have been missing from my life if I didn't try that. Um, but I guess I've proven to myself that if I want to dedicate myself to some format of poker and get really, really good at it, I believe I can. Um, so I don't think I don't feel a need to do it, but I still love poker.
Did you ever feel any temptation over the last like decade or so once online kind of like the whole US like stuff like ended and like you sticking around Las Vegas, did you ever feel any temptation to kind of go the Scott Seaver like Bobby's room like mixed game route, or like I think you've said in the past that like limit games don't really get your juices flowing in the same way. Um
Yeah, so like yeah, I've definitely felt the temptation. And when I was playing, so this game that I was talking about is called Big Bet Mix. It was like 12 different games, all no limit and pot limit. And it was cool because it was not a private game, but it was an organized game. So we'd all like get texts and we'd show up and play. And then if anybody wanted to join, they could. But the that game actually, it was cool because there was a bunch of games nobody in the game had played before. So we were learning it together. Um, it switched. Eventually that game died out. And this is like for half of that downswing I talked about, the game had switched to be half limit and half big bet, because there are just not enough bodies anymore that wanted to play straight no limit and pot limit. And so they kind of like got some people from Bobby's room to participate by adding limit games. I don't know. I just don't like, I really dislike, you know what? It's not that I dislike limit games. I think they're actually pretty fun. Um, they're fun to play in the same way that like blackjack is fun to play to me, but it's not like strategically. I don't know. It's either like it's either that I don't find them fun strategically, or that that's an excuse because I'm not good. Like that, it doesn't play to my strengths for some reason. So yeah, I've had the thought, and I've absolutely considered it very seriously, and I've even studied those games seriously with that intention. But just yeah, I realized it wasn't for me. I think that a big part of these games is, I mean, there are politics, but a big part of it is optics. And so it's not just, does the host want you in the game because they think you're going to be a losing player? But even if like the host likes you and wants you in the game, even though they know you're going to win, can they present a story to the other players that the game is like that you're good for the game? And so in a lot of cases, I think it's like it's funny as I've learned kind of the world of private games. A lot of times you get whatever however many people together, and they all think the value is elsewhere. And it's tough. Like for me, like nobody thinks probably some people do, but basically nobody thinks I'm bad. And so, nobody can be like, hey, I've invited Phil to the game because he's a businessman now, and he really tilts, and like it's a great spot. Whereas like sometimes people get in the games even though they're good players because they are surgeons. Like you'll get these people who get really good at poker not as their main job, and they have like a main job that is they can make good money from. And so like the optics of, here's Bill the surgeon, oh, the surgeon's coming today. And so like there is an element of kind of maintaining an image, um, and not being identified as a pro in the games, and or maybe you're a pro, but there's a story to like, okay, well, yeah, this guy like the only thing he does is play poker, but he made $9 million in, investing in Bitcoin. And so like you need a story and if your story is I made the money from playing poker, and like and from making poker training videos and coaching people, it's not a good story.
You're revealing the true story of why Taylor KB and Andrew Wiggins blew up card runners finally. They were like, let's torpedo card runners and we'll destroy the private game somewhere.
Exactly, yeah. But I do know people that stopped making videos or wanted to make training videos, but didn't specifically because it was gonna kill their chance of in their eyes, kill their chance of getting into good games. It is a concern. I think years into the future, it could become a really big concern. I don't think it is right now a really big concern. And that's not to say that there aren't people out there in lower stakes games who are doing it. Um, but it is to say that like those games are still very beatable. So whether, if you're entering a $20 MTT with 800 players and 6 of them are using RTA, like the games are still super beatable. And that like you shouldn't be okay with that. But the reality is it's not like I think sometimes people super overreact to whether it's that or even like and this will just come off as a total brag, but I thought it was ridiculous. There's one time this was many years ago, but there was a 5100 PLO game and I was on it was like I was on a must move table and then I got my seat in the main game and it was like 8-handed and one player sat out and then like a few hands later another player sat out and then everybody sat out around me and I was the only one left. And I was just like, yeah, I'm good. But like how much is one person at a table of 8 really impacting your EV? And so there is all that to say, it's a risk. It's happening now a little bit. It's not happening as much as, well, you know what? I don't know how much it's happening. I think there are like some people way overreact to it and other people react appropriately. I think that, to your point about, and this is not so much about this, but like everybody worrying about poker dying and poker hasn't died, but poker has continued to evolve. And that's really what's happening is it's adapted, it's evolved to survive the different threats. And so one of the evolutions has been games going private, and that in some ways is bad, but in some ways it's good because I think the way in which it's good is as poker was the path that poker was headed down was that recreational players were like really not enjoying themselves in high stakes games and probably like had somehow somebody waved a magic wand and said no private games are allowed. The high stakes economy would be much worse. Now a lot of it's gone private and that's not good, but from private games, there are people that come into public games or, there are other ways that it can work out for people or, a lot of people can get into private games. I'm not really one of them, but I think that's just a case of there's this threat, which is that players have gotten some combination of too good and too unaccommodating to players, like in live games especially, that has caused an evolution of them to go private. And there are, other things like this. And, you mentioned the VPIP minimum, that's an evolution as well. And that's an evolution to, well, people like recreational players not having enough fun. It's an evolution to RTA as well. Although you can probably figure out ways to solve for that, but it's another step. It's harder. So yeah, I think poker keeps evolving, and in the worst case scenario, is it possible that it evolves to become all offline? Or if the online games, I don't think necessarily that, but it might evolve to the high stakes online games being private and or the high stakes online games being, if not private, but like something you have to submit to, almost like a global entry or TSA pre-check, where it's like, I'm going to fill out all these forms and let you do a background check on me so that now I'm allowed to play in these games and get hassled less. So maybe it's, if you want to play above 1020, we're going to have a 3 webcam setup in your office. Like it might get that extreme one day if it's such a huge threat, but in order to play, people will be willing to go through that if that's what they have to do. So yeah, I think it evolves. More opportunities to learn. I think that to actually play in good games, no, there are fewer. The games are a lot tougher now. There's no doubt about it. But so are the learning resources. The learning resources are much more plentiful. Um, I do think we are in an upswing for poker. Um, like the post Black Friday, so that was 2011. Poker had been declining, I think, until I don't know. I want to call it like 6 years ago or 5 years ago or something, which is basically the YouTube era, um, because essentially poker media back then, I don't mean like poker news, but I mean like poker entertainment was high stakes poker, poker after dark, WSOP on ESPN. And with the exception of WSOP on ESPN, which did get a lot less popular, the other shows kind of just stopped when Full Tilt was shut down and Poker Stars was removed from the US. And so there was a big lull in poker content. And then lately, a lot of people have been finding poker through social media and vloggers and other like shorts content creators. And it's very clear like that the numbers are increasing. You can see it in WSOP event registrations that are up. You can see it in like countries that show up buying run at once memberships or other like training tools or watching videos on YouTube. Like it's getting bigger in other places than it was before. And I think poker's growing. So I think there's good reason to be optimistic, at the very least, about playing live poker, because I think it's growing right now, very clearly. But I mean, there's no denying that when I started playing poker, I feel like if you got a hold of the right coach or mentor or whatever, if you found the right books or training sites, like anybody with an average intelligence could be beating, call it 500 NL online. And it's certainly not the case anymore.
We're going to take a couple of questions here from the chat. First, I think you already touched on this topic, but Eric asked, do you think it's better to specialize in cash or tournaments, or can you play and study both?
There's not a clear answer for everybody, but what I would lean towards specializing, at least if there's ample opportunity in the one that you're specializing in. And that means not just game availability of what you're playing, but also availability of the game above that and the game above that in terms of stakes, like upward mobility is possible. Then I think it might be best to stick with one. But I think everybody's different. And sometimes there's an environment where, what might be best is that you get really good at tournaments. And like, you don't study cash that much, but you get into like, there's a really good cash game that runs like once a week or twice a week. And when you get that great opportunity, you play that, but really you're a tournament specialist. So there could be times like that where that makes sense. This is more of a theory than anything, because like at this point I've specialized in a lot of games and I've learned a lot of games, but I mean, I'm a PLO specialist right now. But yeah, I think specializing is often going to be better. I'll say it that way.
So Marcus here has a question about PLO. What would you say was the most reliable population tendency you found to be exploited coming up through PLO small stakes? And did you ever play PLO small stakes, by the way?
No, I didn't. And I didn't even play no limit cash small stakes because I started out at small stakes sit and goes. And then when I switched, played the highest sit and goes online. And then I switched to 1K NL cash. And then when I started playing PLO, the first PLO I played was 200, 400 PLO. So I never came up the PLO small stakes. I've dabbled, specifically for training videos and like working with, reviewing other people's play. And so if I had to guess, population tendencies, I think people don't realize how often somebody has a flush. You have a flush a lot, especially when many people see the flop. I think there's just like people overvalue their hand strength on the flop by quite a bit. And so there's just like a huge overvaluing of top two pair or bottom set or an overpair plus a gut shot. And this is, again, especially in multi-way pots and especially when deep, where a lot of those hands are like dry top two pair, and a four-way pot is pretty bad hand in a lot of cases. So yeah, those are the things I would say are the biggest. And also I think people end up under, like, it's really hard to bluff enough, like on flush boards specifically, um, in multi-way pots, or even actually not even just in multi-way pots, but like when people wait for the ace of hearts blocker and like they've raised in early position, like you just have a suited hand a lot. And just, I think there are a lot of cases where nobody's bluffing enough on those boards because they're not utilizing, like, they fast play too many of their nut flushes and they give up some of the time with the nut flush blocker, which you kind of never can because you have it so infrequently compared to the actual nut flush. So things like, and they don't reach for other bluffs often enough. So yeah, I would say under bluffing, overvaluing a second best draw, a second like marginal made hands. Those are the biggest.
For a while, you've been running your Beyond the Game program with Race to 10. We're trying to create something similar for low stakes players. So what has been your kind of like biggest takeaway since you started running your new program? And also, what is the main value that a person joining a similar program can get, in your opinion?
Really good question. So I think whether, like, in any kind of community environment, especially one where there's actual real conversation. So like, it's one thing to be in like a Discord community with 1,000 people where there's like some conversation about stuff, but in one that you actually really connect with people, um, you never know when, like, 2 minutes of that whole year that you're a part of a program is going to be worth 40 times the cost of the program. Like there's, that one, whether it's one insight or that one connection to one person that leads to a massive opportunity, or that, like, that one connection to one person that 3 years from now introduces you to this other person that gets you into this game that is a huge opportunity. There are a lot of these, like the coolest thing about um, the community aspect as opposed to one-on-one coaching, which, yeah, there in one-on-one coaching, there can be little nuggets that unlock something for you. Absolutely. But in this, where there are other people involved, it's just like that one thing, that one connection with one person, that one thing that one other person says they're dealing with that you didn't realize you were dealing with, and them solving it led to you unlocking something huge for yourself. There are these like little moments that happen that are just like, wow, that was huge. Like that, I wouldn't have figured that out for myself, and that led to something so important for me. Um, so just like putting yourself in these environments, and this is true at, like, if when you go to like live events with small groups of people and really get to connect with people, I mean, you could consider it a general networking thing, but yeah, I just think it's keep an open mind, and don't be surprised when something massive happens when you least expect it.
We've reached the end of the Q&A. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Phil. And as a quick reminder, the session was brought to you by Race to 10, our new 6-month coaching program for low stakes live Nolan Hold'em cash game players. Our goal with the program is to get you to a $10,000 bankroll within the next 6 months. If that is something that interests you, go to race to10.com or simply click the link in the description below.